Let's get your questions answered. I'm Ashley Kerr, and I'm here with Tony J. Robinson.
And welcome to the Real Estate Rookie Podcast, where every week, 3 times a week, we bring you the inspiration, motivation, and stories you need to hear to kickstart your investing journey. Now, today, we're diving back into the BiggerPockets forums to get your questions answered. Now, guys, the forums are the best place for you to quickly get all of your real estate investing questions answered by experts like me, like Ashley, and so many others who are active inside of those forums. So today, we're going to talk about someone who's actually thinking about quitting real estate altogether, what renovations actually raise rents on a property, whether or not you should consider buying a turnkey rental, and would you buy a property that doesn't actually follow the 1% rule?
So, Tony, let's go into I'm in the rehabbing and house flipping in the BiggerPockets forum section right now. Let's pick a question out of there. Do you see a good one?
Yeah, so I've got one here from Sam Z. And Sam says, so I've got this rental property. I was currently renting it at $1,000 per month, but I'm trying to get that to about $1,400 to $1,500 per month. The cabinets are original, about 45 years old. The cabinet under the sink had water damage to the base, and I have the option of just repairing that and painting the inside of it, or I could just get all new cabinets on the top and the bottom. What would you do? Also, the toilets are old, probably 15 to 25 years old. I'm having the old, really worn and poorly laid tile floors replaced with full LVP, so they would need to be reseated anyway. What projects do you consider when wanting to raise rents? Lot to unpack there, Ashley. He talks about currently being at $1,000, trying to get that up almost 50%, right, to $1,500 per month. I guess before you even go into, Ashley, let me ask you, before you even go into doing any sort of repairs on a property with the goal of rent increases, what data are you looking at first to help you make that decision?
Yeah, so you want to look at the comparables. So what are the properties that are renting for $1,400, $1,500 per dollars per month? And are there actually those properties out there? And what do they have that's different from yours? So LVP is definitely one thing we always immediately do. Rip out carpets, put in LVP over linoleum, whatever may be in there. That is a really great way to add value to the property and increase what you can get into rent. So right there, that's a great first step. So look in the area, look at the other properties in your area. What are some of the things they have? As far as the toilet, I would say just for maintenance, that you don't get maintenance calls that the toilet finally does break down, or you're needing to replace pieces and parts of this, the toilet valve, all these different things on it, to go ahead and replace it, because it is not that costly of a repair to do. You're looking at, maybe if you're having somebody install it, maybe $500 with a decent toilet, the wax seal, everything you need, and then labor for insulation. So I would say that 100% definitely go ahead and do that. And everybody likes the look of a new shiny toilet instead of, I'm wondering if this one's, 15 to 25 years old, if it's one really, really small one that's really low to the ground too. But what about the cabinets, Tony? Does painting the cabinets compared to installing new cabinets, do they make a difference in any of the rehabs you have done?
So I feel like it depends, right? Like because you can do some renovations with a goal of increasing the after repair value of the home. And then you can do some renovations to a property that may not impact the ARV as much, but it'll impact the rental rate. And those are, and that's true for traditional long-term rentals, especially true for short-term rentals. Like I can put, we put like a golf course, like a mini golf inside of one of our garages. I don't know if that's really going to impact the ARV as much, but it definitely impacts the rental rates, right? So I think you've got to try and decide. So I would look at the other, like you said, I would go back to the other comps that are in the area from a rental perspective, and I would see, are they all brand new cabinets, right? Or are they all just repainted with fresh hardware? And if you can get away with just repainting, then do that. And we've done that sometimes in our properties where we don't replace the cabinets. We just, sand them down, paint them, put on some fresh hardware, and we save a bunch of money doing it that way. So it all depends on what the market is saying and kind of what the market's doing.
And what the cost is going to be to replace those cabinets. Because if you have a huge kitchen and you're going to replace all of them, that can add up really fast to replace all the cabinets. And then say you are going to raise your rent to $1,400 per month from $1,000. But if those cabinets are going to cost, it's going to be a $30,000 kitchen upgrade, then maybe that extra $400 isn't worth it. But that's where you have to see the kind of the cost benefit there is what is going to be your return on your investment of upgrading those cabinets. How will that increase your cash flow?
So it feels like we're both saying the same thing, Ashley, is that, Sam, if you want to make this decision, it could be the right thing to do, but don't just go off a gut feel. Look at the data, see what other properties who are charging that much, what are they offering to their residents, what are they offering to their tenants, and see if you can incorporate those things in at a reasonable amount.
Yeah. And the last kind of the piece of his question was, what projects do you consider when wanting to raise rent? So like something besides the LVP, that's like our number one thing. But the next thing is like the toilet, the vanity, and the tub surround. Like if it's the tub surround is nasty and it's worn and just not great and the caulk is all bad, we'll like just rip that out and replace that, seal it all up nice. And then also, new faucet, new shower head, things like that can really make a difference in the bathroom and not be super expensive. And then just, a cheap Lowe's vanity that looks nice and new compared to the one that's disgusting and gross that's been in there for years or that's completely outdated. You can get a vanity pretty cheap these days too. So those little bathroom upgrades we will do too. And then fresh coat of paint. Fresh coat of paint makes all the difference in the world as long as you're not just painting everything over outlets and things like that. But, and then painting the trim. So in a lot of older apartments that have wood trim that's stained, we've actually been painting them. I don't know what the guys do, but they put some kind of something on the trim before they paint it since it was stained first. So I'm doing that too.
And I guess just the last thing too, and you touched on this a little bit, Ashley, but it's like, how do you calculate what your return on investment is for this upgrade? And, a lot of times as investors, we have the decision of making, do I reinvest back into my existing properties or do I take that capital and deploy it into buying something new? And, it's a case by case basis on what makes more sense. But say that you are able to achieve a $500 per month increase in rents, right? So $500 per month over 12 months. What is that? $6,000 times 12? Yeah, $6,000 a year. So say it costs you, Sam, $12,000 to do all of these renovations on this unit. You just earned an extra $6,000 per month in revenue. And assuming your expenses stay the same, that almost all of that's going to your bottom line. So you got a 50% return on the $12,000 that you just invested. So I think that's a metric that we probably don't talk about enough. We're talking about upgrading existing properties, but what kind of return will I get on this specific cash that I'm putting into these repairs?
Yeah. And we had a guest and I can't remember who it was, but that's what they were currently doing. That was kind of like their goal for 2024 was instead of buying new properties was adding value, like putting in a sauna and different things, spending their money that they were saving up to add value because it was increasing their nightly rate by so much that they were actually getting more benefit, a bigger return by adding value to the property they already had. And it was less headache. You weren't having to manage another listing, repairs on another property, less overhead. Definitely a good way to think about it.
So how about you, Ashley? Is there any questions that are maybe sticking out to you inside of the BP forums?
Well, I'm looking in the general investing discussions, and here's one that he writes. I'm thinking of selling my rental properties and quitting real estate investing due to stress of ownership. I have 2 properties managed by a property manager. The reason I am thinking of getting out of being a real estate investor is due to the stress and constant little expenses that are adding up. Recently, there was a major plumbing problem at one of the single family homes and the tenants were not able to use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the issue was so severe that it required the tenants to move out for the repairs to be completed. I was genuinely stressed out by this, feeling bad for the renters who are unable to use the bathroom, fearing possible litigation, even if there is no reason to be sued, just an irrational fear. The other issue is recurrent expenses. Although I have allocated 20% of rental income for both properties for repairs and maintenance, I have easily spent over that for both the properties. Plumbers are crazy expensive, increasing city taxes, thinking if another issue is going to come up and I won't be getting the full rent to cover the mortgage. Using my personal finance to pay for repairs and numerous other small things that in isolation are not a big deal, but they just keep adding up and create anxiety for me. I am debating if I should sell my 2 houses and just move the money into syndications or the stock market. I'm looking at my Vanguard account and my portfolio is up 30% year to date with zero stress. Real estate for me is not my primary source of income. I have a regular job that pays well. What are your guys' thoughts? Is this something you have experienced as well? How did you deal with it? Does it get better or worse? How do you deal with the stress of ownership? 100% relatable. I was thinking of my own stress. Literally, like right before we recorded this episode, I got a phone call saying that the plumbers are trying to schedule because there's a water leak from the upper unit's bathroom to the lower person's bathroom. And the lower people are cooperative. The upper person saying, well, I'm not sure if I'll be here. You can try and see if I'm here. And it's like, no, you have to be there. Like, say yes, you'll be there. No, this is the time I will be there. And that's exactly what I was thinking of. Like, yes, and it's probably going to be an expensive expense. But so yes, these things are definitely relatable as a real estate investor. So, Tony, what's the first thing you look at as to here's the first thing you should be analyzing if this is for you or not for you?
Yeah, I think I just add on to what you just said as well, Ash. I just think it's good for everyone to hear that these issues that Mohsen is talking about, these are the issues that come along with investing in real estate. And I think this is why there are returns to be made in real estate, why there's profit to be made in real estate, because there are issues that the general person or the average person maybe doesn't want to deal with. And it's us accepting that kind of risk that allows us to reap that reward. So just know it is part of the process, most of that we go through. I think the first thing, actually the first question I'd ask Ashley is because he said, I have 2 properties that are being managed by a property manager. And when I read that sentence, I was thinking to myself, like, why is there so much stress coming back on Mohsen as the owner if he's paying someone as the property manager? The plumbing issue, that's probably a one-off thing that I wouldn't anticipate happening all that frequently, where you got to move tenants out of the property and relocate them somewhere else. But like all the kind of, day-to-day grind of managing these properties, it should be done and taken care of by that PM. So I don't know. I guess from your perspective, just hearing this, do you feel like Mohsen's property manager is doing a good enough job?
Well, it could just be that they're telling him what's happening and him getting stressed by that. Could be the fact it's not like he's coordinating where they have to stay when they move out and things like that. But also could be footing the bill. When I had a property management company, there was water coming into someone's apartment and they rented her on, the company's dime to go and stay at a hotel. She ended up not even showing up to the hotel, but we still had to pay. And even though they coordinated that, it was still like stressful, I could say, in a sense, like, oh yeah, now this tenant's obviously not going to be happy. What other issues are going to come up now? And just, I think that would be a lot of it. But as far as the expenses, so when you have a property manager, it's a lot harder to control your expenses. So for example, plumbers are expensive. Yes. When I started out, we used just like the local handyman that, I don't even know if he had his plumbing license, but he did everything, and it was definitely a lot cheaper than having somebody from like a plumbing company come to the property. So, but I was able to control my costs that way. Where as a property management company, a professional company, they need everybody to be licensed, insured, bonded, have all their ducks in a row, which are going to be more expensive for them to bring out to your property to do the work. So I think maybe if the stress is actually the financial stress of, even though you can afford to pay these things, it doesn't mean that you want your money to go to all these expenses that are adding up. I think that if you want to be able to control costs, maybe this is where you hire an asset manager, somebody who can actually go to the property management company and they're the ones controlling the costs for you as to, okay, we're lowering the threshold. If there is a repair that needs to be done, it's no longer a $500 minimum where you have to talk to me. It's now a $100 minimum, which maybe they won't agree to, but then you're having your asset manager go and kind of say like, yes, okay, this isn't actually a good price or not. or you just hire somebody to be your own property manager in-house and help you control those costs. Because a property management company is going to have relationships with these contractors, where for a plumbing issue, they're not going to go and bid out a $500. Yeah, they already work with this, reputable vendor. They're just going to keep using them. And that was a problem that I had too. But even now with our property management company, we use the same plumber every time, but we get a great deal and we get great service because we use them constantly for our properties, unfortunately. But I think there are ways to hire somebody, and reading the book, The Self-Managing Landlord, that's on BiggerPockets, I can help you if you want to hire someone. It just has to be a couple hours a week for them to manage your properties, and you can control more of the costs that way too.
That was something that I noticed when I had my first long-term rental. My PM, my property manager, also owned his own maintenance company. And obviously his first option for any maintenance needs was always his own company. And I noticed the same thing where we were spending a lot of money every month on these small kind of nickel and dime type repairs. And I actually did very similar, Ash, to what you just laid out, where I said, hey, I need to have a little bit more control over what gets sourced to you guys versus what we're sourcing to someone else. And it took a little bit more work on my end, but we were able to shave off some of that monthly expense by bidding it out to someone who was 50% cheaper, right? So I do think, Mohsen, that if you maybe play a little bit more active role in the selection of who's actually doing those repairs, you can start to pull down what you're spending for that on a regular basis. And honestly, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the last question too, Ashley, where it's like, hey, what are these things that are giving you a headache, that are causing these issues? And does it maybe make more sense just to spend a little bit more upfront to fully repair or replace those things? That way these knick-knack every single month type repairs start to go away.
Yeah. One thing we had problem too was we would be charged for, a maintenance tech to come out and look at the issue. And then we'd be charged with the vendor, the plumbing company they hired to come out and quote the issue. And then we would be charged again for them to come and perform the issue. And so that was a big thing as to okay, if you already know based off of the work order, this isn't in the scope of the maintenance staff of the property management company, just send the plumbers out directly right away. And so there was a lot of inefficiencies that we figured out that were costly to us. So, and then also too, things that we were charged for that should have been the tenant's responsibility. This, I don't know if this happened, but it's the only thing I can think of right now is if the glass broke on a window. The chances of glass just randomly shattering, most likely it's, they hit something with it or whatever. So something like that would be, obvious. It's the tenant's responsibility for different things and they should be charged, but yet we were still charged with it. So having to constantly watch for things like that too.
Well, what about that last part of Mohsen's question? He said, I'm debating on if I should sell. When I hear that question, I think there's probably one big thing that comes to mind for me. It's how much equity do you have inside of these properties right now? And say you bought these maybe, pre-pandemic, 2018, 17, 16, maybe even sooner than that, and you're sitting on a ton of equity right now, even though maybe your cash flow is getting eaten up because you have to keep dealing with these repairs. If you can sell those two properties and you get, 6 figures plus in equity, you can then roll into another property. Well, hey, there's your opportunity to still be a real estate investor, but maybe move this into an asset that it's maybe a little bit newer, maybe, a little less management headache. But I think that's the question I would ask, is how much equity are you sitting on? And, what kind of return can you get if you deploy that equity elsewhere?
Yeah. So with him talking about the stock market, now his portfolio is up 30% year to date. Okay. Well, that's today. If you're going to hold this property for 30 years, what's the third, look at the historical of say you're investing in index funds. Okay. What's the historical rate over the past 30 years? And how much has that actually gone up? And it's still a good amount, very decent for very passive investment. But what's that compared to somebody who bought a property, say you put $100,000 30 years ago into index funds, and at year 30, how much did they make off that property compared to somebody else who bought a property for $100,000 30 years later? What's their property worth then? I don't know the answer, and I probably should because that's a great comparison, but use that to kind of gauge as to, okay, there's some more work now and financial commitment to buying real estate, but down the road, holding this property, is it going to be worth more than what your investments are? And, if you're invested in different things that's more volatile than index funds, then, it's not as easy to measure, I would say. But that 30% is just what you've yielded today or this year. That's not long-term, like a rental property. What would you get? But if you can guarantee you'll get 30% over the next 30 years, then stick to your Vanguard stocks for sure.
And, I think we've mentioned this on the show before as well, but I do think that part of the appeal to me of real estate is that you tend to have a little bit more control. And like, think about the issues, Mosin, that you're talking about for these two properties that you have. Ash and I just walked through several things that you personally can do to potentially improve the performance of those assets. And that is a level of control that you do not have when it comes to the stock market. And even though year to date, like Ashley said, you're up 30%, how realistic is it that that will continue? Not to get political, but, we're in an election year. Stock market tends to react pretty wildly depending on who gets elected to be president. And you have zero control over that, Mosin, right? So it's just certain things to consider of how much control do you want to have over this money that you're deploying into these different assets.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add too is, there may be headaches now, but as time goes on, you're going to be able to increase your rent. And yes, insurance will increase, property taxes will increase. But if you're locked in to a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, you know exactly what your mortgage payment is going to be for the next 30 years. So that's not going to increase. And most of the time, you are able to increase rents more than your insurance and your property taxes are going to increase. So you will see the margin of your cash flow actually growing as time goes on. In most markets and most scenarios, of course, not always the case. And you could have huge capital improvement expenses that hurt that. But if you have a property, over the long term, your cash flow usually can get higher based on the fact that your mortgage payment stays the same, except if you're in escrow, you'll see those little bit of increases. Or if you're in Florida and Texas and your insurance has skyrocket, then that does not apply.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the last part of his question is like, how do you deal with it? So like the stress of ownership. So Tony, what are you doing daily? Is it facials followed by a massage? What's the de-stressor?
I think for me, what kind of keeps me centered and keeps me balanced as a real estate investor is the understanding that almost any path you choose, there's always ups and downs. And for me, and this goes back to what I said earlier, and for me, I would always choose to be the person in control, at least somewhat, of what those ups and downs look like. And I think that's what gives me the confidence, is maybe it's the confidence in myself to know that, hey, I can figure this thing out. Right. And as long as I have that confidence in my ability to sort through these issues, that gives me the confidence to say, hey, let's keep moving forward. But I think that's what it is. It's a level of control that you have. What about for you, Ashley? What helps you keep a level head throughout all the stress?
Having really nice reserves in place and knowing that those reserves are meant to be spent, that's not my life savings, that is for big repairs, capital improvements, those unexpected costs. And I had a really hard time parting with money to put into my rentals, thinking about this could pay for my kids to have a dirt bike or whatever, like putting that amount of money in relation to something, a personal benefit for me and my family. instead of this is what this money is meant for. It's meant to be spent on the rental properties. It's meant to be spent on my business. It's meant to invest in my business. And once I became okay with that, that's really where things started to change for me, as to the stress level went down. But also I really started to understand the time a stressor actually took from my life was actually not that much time. That, okay, maybe it was a phone call to a plumber, then writing the check to pay the plumber, something like that. And I was just using the stress was what was overwhelming me. And once I became okay with parting with the money, it was like, okay, this is going to take me 10 minutes. It's the plumber's actual problem to solve, not mine. I don't have to figure it out. And so once I became at peace with those types of things, it became a lot easier for me to not get overwhelmed, to not get stressed out, and to not lay awake at night, like gritting my teeth, like, oh, why do I have to pay this big expense and blah, blah, blah. And the same with evictions too. Like if someone stops paying and they're, I'm going through the eviction, I used to, lay awake at night and get so aggravated and irritated. Like, these people, I can't let them get away with this. I can't let them do this to me and stuff. And once you understand that's part of the business, that is going to happen, you have to just let it go. You got to do an emotional release, man, and breathe it out. So once you understand these things will happen and you become at peace with that and you're ready with your reserves and understand you may have to spend money. And just like right now, you're spending money now. But as Tony said, figure out what are the expenses that are coming up. And maybe this is the end. Maybe there's, I think you bought the properties the last 2 years, maybe. I don't know if you said, but, maybe these are just little things that needed to be done and you'll have a break and it'll be good. Or maybe you actually do need to get another lump sum of cash and put in a big, expense to repair it and replace it instead of just doing these little tiny fixes. So
I guess the only other thing that we haven't considered, Ashley, is that maybe he did just buy a bad deal. Maybe he bought these properties in in a war zone, in a property or in a city that he knew nothing about, and he just saw hey, the purchase prices were pretty low, not thinking about what actually comes along with the day-to-day management. So I guess there is that possibility, Mohsen, but without doing a deep dive into your actual underwriting, it's hard for us to say for sure. Which is why everyone who's listening to this podcast right now, use the BiggerPockets tools for estimating your revenue and profitability and all those things before you jump into a deal. Because just because something has a lower purchase price doesn't always mean that it's a better deal. So just something to consider as well. But hopefully most of that isn't the case for you and you did the analysis and it all worked out.
And one thing too, because you specifically mentioned that plumbers were expenses, is we always put in our lease agreements, if you clog or plug any drain or pipe after 30 days of moving in, maybe it's 60, it's your responsibility to clear it. And we give a list of here's the different ways to, vinegar and baking soda, I don't even know what it is, but so a list of different ways to clear the sink, because if it clogs after 30 to 60 days, it was not from the previous tenant. It wasn't from us. It was from something you put down the drain. Whether it be something disposed out of your body, your hair falling out of your head, or a kid shoving something down the sink, or grease going down the sink. And that has saved us a lot of money in plumbing costs of not having those calls anymore, because really it's not your fault as the landlord, unless there is something at the street or whatever, and it starts backing up or whatever. But, yeah, so that's one thing that has really helped us a lot, just all of a sudden. And especially in the apartment complexes, because if there's, or a duplex, because if there's something wrong with the pipes from the house to the road, it's going to be going on in both units. It's not going to be just be one sink that has the issue too.
Well, Mohsen, a lot for you to chew on there. So hopefully got some value from kind of hearing how Ash and I were both talk through that. But you got options. I think that's the most important thing. But guys, look, we love talking real estate. We love answering your questions. And we'd love it if you guys could hit the follow button on whatever podcast platform it is you're listening to this podcast on. Follow, subscribe, and really share it with someone, right? If you're enjoying the content of the Rookie Podcast, take a few minutes, share with that friend or family member who you want to see do well. So yeah, we appreciate you guys supporting the podcast as always.
So Tony, let's look into the house hacking discussions. Do you see one there that you like?
I do. So I see one from Jaquan, and he says, "What's up, guys? I'm trying to buy a quadplex or a fourplex to house hack for my family. We're planning to stay there for about 1 to 2 years and then looking for the cash flow after we leave. So my plan is to get experience managing properties and managing tenants. Right now, I'm looking at a deal that seems promising, but the numbers aren't that great, but also they're not that bad. It seems the deal is a little out of the 1% rule and the 50% rule, but here are the exact numbers. So the asking price is $486,000. The rental income is $1,200 per unit for a total of $4,800. He says his mortgage will be $2,600 at a 7.3% interest rate, and he's estimating expenses to be about $2,200 on top of that. So he comes in at about 45% on the 50% rule, which we'll define here in a bit. So he says these numbers, again, the $4,800 per month, are not with me house hacking, but it's after I move out, and I'm doing it that way to see if this is a good house to start with. In short, the deal falls below the 1% rule, but it does meet the 50% rule for expenses. I feel this also looks not super great because of the 7.3% interest rate, but he's trying to be conservative to take vacancy into account. So Ash, what are your thoughts on hearing this? And maybe first, let's define what the 1% rule and the 50% rule are. So the 1% rule is basically just saying your rental income ideally should be 1% of your purchase price. So for him, he's pretty darn close. He's at $486,000 in his purchase price. So 1% of that is 4.87 almost, right? So he's pretty close on that piece. And the 50% rule is saying that 50% of your income should be expenses, right?
Yeah, your expenses should be no more than 50% of your income on the property. So on here, he's not hitting the 50% rule either, because 2,200 he's saying would be 45%, and his mortgage payment alone is going to be 2,600 a month. So that would be over 50%. I think he said the max he wanted to be was 45% expenses. So I think house hacking is a different scenario to actually be using the 1% rule or the 50% rule as a metric, because you're using it to reduce your living costs. So say Tony's living in his house right now, and he goes and buys a single family home as an investment property, and it hits the 1% rule and it hits the 50% rule, but he's still paying the mortgage he has on his house. But you are going, and maybe you're not hitting the 1% rule and you're not hitting the 50% rule. Maybe your expenses total are less than what Tony is paying between his primary and his investment. So I feel like it's not apples to apples to use those ratios in comparison, because you'll be living in the property. And also, it is very hard to hit the 1% rule anywhere these days. Like I used to, super easy. I could get like 3% one time I got on a property, and now you can't even. But also in New York, the expenses are really high for property taxes. So it's really hard to hit the 50% rule. So that's why it's important to never just use one metric or even two metrics. You want to take all metrics into consideration, but also you want to know in the market you're investing in. And I don't think he says what market this is in, but you want to know what the standard is in your market. So look at houses or rentals that maybe recently sold and then were listed. What was the purchase price and how much are they being listed for rent for? And you can kind of gauge an idea of like, okay, this is what's currently happening in my market, and they're not even close to the 1% rule. Then you got to kind of figure out like, okay, how are they making the deal work? And maybe it's because they paid all cash and they just did a 1031 exchange and they just wanted, to buy something, or maybe they're house hacking too. So I wouldn't worry about those metrics too much. I never pay attention to them, honestly, because they just don't apply to what I'm trying to do. I guess I'm more concerned about what the cash flow is on the property than those rules of them.
Yeah, and you made a lot of good points there, Ashley, and I couldn't agree more on not just viewing this isolated as like a traditional real estate investment, but like, yeah, how much money are you actually saving, and what are you paying in rent right now, wherever it is that you're living? And at $4,800 or $1,200 a unit, even if you're living in one, on the other three, you're making $3,600 in revenue from those, which is still going to cover your mortgage and then some. So even while you're living there, you're living for free, and you have money left over to cover your mortgage, which is great. Now, I think the other thing that I would consider too in this equation, Jaquan, is what cash out of pocket are you putting into this deal as well? Because say you're able to get into this for 3.5% down, 5% down, or maybe you're using, some down payment assistance program, you're getting into it for 0 down. Well, now this is a killer deal, right? Because who cares if you're not hitting the 1% rule? If you got into this for only a couple $1,000, your cash on cash return is going to be sky high. Right. And is that something that you can repeat over and over again to start buying up a bunch of fourplexes in your neighborhood where every 12 to 24 months you're putting down another 3.5%, right? And you've got something, another property to add to the portfolio. So I think that the cash out of pocket is going to be an important thing to consider as well to kind of gauge how good of an investment this actually is.
And it's super close to the 1%. If he buys it at $486,000, he's still getting $4,800 in rent. So that's like 0.98% maybe. Yeah. So that's actually pretty close. So yeah, I would think that this seems like definitely a deal to look into further, that this could possibly it did say down here more. I see now Houston, Texas is where the property is. So make sure you get your insurance quote.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like one thing that I would add to this as well is like the very first deal that I did, it was a long-term rental, and I think my rent was $1,350 a month, something like that. But I think my mortgage was like, I don't know, I think like 140, somewhere in that ballpark. So I was slightly below the 1% rule as well, but it literally cost me $0 out of pocket. It was a perfect burr. So I had no money left in this deal. So who cares if I'm not meeting the 1% rule, because I have no cash left in this deal at all. And I could do that infinitely, right? And it's still going to be cash flow positive for me because I didn't have to leave anything in that deal. So I think the 1% rule, the 50% rule, those are just benchmarks to kind of help you quickly analyze and skim through deals to see if you're way off. But I feel like you're pretty close on both of those to not stop me from moving forward.
Okay. So our last question here is, in the starting out discussion, and Jason asked, this is my first time posting to the BiggerPockets forum. Well, welcome, Jason, and congratulations on your first post. So Jason says, I must say the education I've been getting from the BiggerPockets podcast has been amazing. I live in California and have managed to put some money aside from my W-2 job to hopefully get into my first rental property. As everyone is well aware, the cost of investing in California is astronomical, so I've turned my attention to long distance investing. I work long hours at my job and have a 5-year-old at home, so my time is very limited. As an investor, what are the pros and cons to buying a turnkey rental?
Maybe let's define turnkey first for the rookie audience, right? So turnkey basically means that you are buying a property that's been usually recently renovated, and most times it's already placed with a tenant. And then you also have the option, and sometimes a requirement, of using whoever you purchased it from, using their company for property management. So turnkey in the sense that all you have to do is sign your closing docs. Everything else is pretty much taken care of for you, right? Tenant's place, management is there, and you just start collecting a check on the back end. So that is the definition of turnkey. Now, there are some pros to it, right? There are some definite benefits to buying turnkey. And first, that it's very easy, right? A lot of these turnkey providers, they have all of their deals that are available for sale just listed on their website. And you can just go through, you can see what options there are and kind of pick the one that you feel suits your, suits your buy box. Even some, I've seen some of the turnkey providers, and I think some who even advertise through BP, but they've been able to negotiate like lower rates. And I don't know if it's seller finance or whatever it is, but I see some, whereas, a lot of investors right now are getting interest rates at 7+%. Some of these turnkey providers are offering rates in like the 3s and the 4s. So even right now in this elevated interest rate environment, going with the turnkey provider might give you the ability to get a lower interest rate. So ease, speed, convenience, I think those are all the pros of going with the turnkey provider. And I guess one last thing I'd add as a pro as well is that it does allow you to get somewhat familiar with the market. Like I've met quite a few investors, even probably folks we've interviewed on the show, who started off investing turnkey in, XYZ city. And once they bought maybe one or two there, they felt confident to do that third one by themselves because they knew the market a little bit already. So it is a good way to kind of get you introduced to a market as well.
Yeah, so let's go into the cons on this. And I think one of the biggest things for me is that everything is wrapped together for you so nicely in a package that there's not a lot of checks and balances. So if you're going to just purchase a property on the MLS, you have your real estate agent who's working for you, who's on your side helping you. You have a home inspector come, you go and purchase the property. Maybe you remodel it. You have a contractor you hire, or you're having a contractor come look at the property. You're hiring a property management company. And most of the time, all through this process, all these people are unrelated. The person who's doing the rehab, the person who's going to manage your property, that's finding you tenants, your real estate agent. So you have these different kinds of different people from different businesses as resources. Okay. So when you're doing turnkey, usually it's the model of the rehab's already done. We did that for you. So here's the property. We're telling you everything is great. We're telling you what the numbers are, what it can list for. So they're telling you like, you don't need a real estate agent. You just buy it directly from us. Here's all the information you need, the comparables, the market information, what this is going to rent for. And here's our property manager that's going to manage it all for you. So everything stays in-house. So there are some turnkey providers where you can take your property, you can go, you don't have to use their property management service once you buy the property. But the thing I would say is have all the information given to you verified. Okay. So like doing the rehab, you want to make sure that it was a quality rehab that was actually performed on the property. So get a home inspector onto the property that's not affiliated with the turnkey company. You can hire your own property manager. You don't have to go with theirs, but maybe theirs is great. So just having some kind of checks and balances, or a person who could be the boots on the ground for you, paying a real estate agent to, just say like, hey, can you just check on this for me at this property? I've just not, I'll give you $100. I'm a little worried about something or whatever it may be. But that's the one thing I don't like is no checks and balances, because everything is wrapped up in-house for you and you're relying on one sole company to take care of everything for you.
Totally true. And I think the biggest con potentially is just the margins, right? The profitability on turnkey deals tends to be a little bit lighter than if you did that work yourself. Because think about it, the turnkey companies, they have to make margin somewhere. And usually that margin is coming from you, right? Typically, because the turnkey providers are the ones that are sourcing the deal off market, direct to seller. They're the ones that are getting that, the benefit of that equity increase by forcing the value of the property up. And then they're selling it to you, with that spread baked in. So the returns are typically going to be lighter on a turnkey deal. And that's probably the biggest con I see for folks who are getting started as well.
And also, like, turnkey can mean different things too. It doesn't mean everything is brand new in the property either. It just basically means it's rent ready. So it could be a property that wasn't, redone from the guts all the way to the cabinet hardware. So I think having an understanding of how far does this company take it when they are remodeling a property, or is it just doing the bare minimum on the property? But what the boiler, it was 5 years old. So, it should have maybe another 5 years in it. You'll be fine. You'll be good. And then it ends up needing repairs constantly or something like that. So having an understanding of what you're actually getting brand new, what the turnkey actually means. Turnkey really means it's rent ready. And so make sure you understand what rent ready means, that it's most of the time doesn't mean you're never going to have a repair or a maintenance cost. But a lot of turnkeys companies do new builds too. So there's always that option too, is going with the new build. But I do want to say, like, I think you can go on the MLS and you can buy properties that are turnkey on there. There's lots of turnkey rentals available on the MLS too, where you could actually go and then you just find your own property manager, you use your own real estate agent, and you put a tenant in place. And yes, you are going to pay a premium on those properties, but you do on turnkey too. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining us for this week's episode of Real Estate Rookie Reply. And if you have a question, make sure you post it in the BiggerPockets forums, and we'll be happy to answer your question on the show. And you'll probably get the answer to your question in the forums from all of the investors that had joined in and contribute to the forum. So if you haven't already asked a question, make sure you jump in, and maybe you'll be able to answer a couple questions too in the BiggerPockets forums. I'm Ashley, and he's Tony, and we'll see you guys next time.
This BiggerPockets podcast is produced by Daniel Zarati, edited by Exodus Media, copywriting by Calico Content.
I'm Ashley, he's Tony, and you have been listening to Real Estate Rookie.
And if you want your questions answered on the show, go to biggerpockets.com/reply.